The blue light of my three monitors was the only illumination left on the fourth floor. It was 11:45 on a humid Tuesday evening, and the rest of the executive corporate suite was completely dark. The evening cleaning staff had already completed their rounds, the soft hum of their industrial vacuums fading down the long hallway hours ago. I sat motionless in my ergonomic office chair, rubbing the grit of sheer exhaustion from my eyes while staring at dense blocks of source code that represented the lifeblood of our freight enterprise. My name is Gerald Montgomery. I am 54 years old, and for the past 9 years, I have served as the lead systems architect for Vanguard Logistics, a nationwide freight and transport carrier operating out of Ohio. To the executive board upstairs, my job description sounded like high-level corporate jargon, but in truth, I was the master plumber who kept the digital pipes from rupturing while senior leadership flushed money down corporate drain pipes. Directly in front of me on the high-resolution screen was the Titan routing engine. That proprietary platform was my proudest professional creation, a complex algorithm I had designed and written entirely from scratch 5 years ago. Titan optimized the real-time shipping schedules, fuel consumption, and transit routes for our nationwide fleet of 450 heavy freight trucks. Over its operational lifespan, my software had saved Vanguard Logistics roughly $3,400,000 every single year in wasted diesel, overtime pay, and maintenance wear. It was elegant, incredibly efficient, and completely dependent on my personal architectural oversight. I took a slow sip of lukewarm dark roast coffee from a chipped ceramic mug that bore the painted words "Best Dad Ever," a birthday gift from my 21-year-old daughter Chloe, 3 years ago. The coffee tasted bitter and stale, but I desperately needed the caffeine boost to complete my final code documentation. I whispered softly to the empty office that just one more night of this grind remained, and then I would finally be free. I was not merely patching software bugs tonight. I was cleaning out my digital workstation and preparing my departure. Earlier that afternoon, I had received a confidential phone call from a senior executive recruiter at a rival logistics technology firm. After 3 months of discreet negotiations, their managing partners had officially delivered a firm employment agreement. The offer included a base compensation 35% higher than my current salary, comprehensive family health coverage, 6 weeks of paid annual leave, and most importantly, an actual dedicated engineering team. I would no longer be the lone firefighter working midnight shifts just to keep the regional server infrastructure online. I had already printed that offer letter at home, signed the acceptance page, and scanned it back to their human resources department. Tucked neatly inside the inner breast pocket of my tailored charcoal suit jacket was my formal resignation letter for Vanguard Logistics. It was succinct, professional, and entirely stripped of the burning resentment that had built up inside me over the past 2 years. I omitted any mention of the hundreds of hours of uncompensated weekend labor. I omitted the bitter memory of missing Chloe's college graduation ceremony because a primary database cluster crashed in Chicago. I simply expressed gratitude for the 9 years of professional experience and provided my standard 2 weeks' notice. I glanced around the shadowy rows of empty cubicles toward the corner office encased in floor-to-ceiling tempered glass. The lights were off, inside the domain of Julian Prescott. Julian was 31 years old, possessed a newly minted graduate degree from a prestigious business school, and had been appointed vice president of operations 6 months ago. Julian was the type of executive who strutted through the office in $3,000 tailored Italian suits, constantly demanding to know why technical departments could not operate on microscopic budgets. He viewed veteran engineers not as strategic assets, but as expensive line items on an Excel balance sheet. To Julian Prescott, I was an overpaid relic of the past. He failed to comprehend that without my constant manual maintenance, the Titan platform would seize up, and if Titan ceased to function, 450 freight trucks would sit paralyzed at loading docks across 15 states. I saved my terminal session, powered down my workstation monitors, and grabbed my coat. The morning alarm sounded at 6:30 Wednesday morning, but I was already lying wide awake in bed. I stared at the ceiling fan, mentally rehearsing the conversation I would have with management. I kissed my wife Evelyn on the cheek as she slept, brewed a fresh thermos of French roast coffee, and patted my jacket breast pocket. The crisp white envelope containing my resignation letter felt like a protective shield. For the first time in nearly a decade, I felt no dread during my morning commute. The sun shone bright across the open highway, and the morning traffic moved smoothly. I pulled my sedan into the company parking garage at 8:15, parking in my assigned space right beside a concrete pillar marked with yellow paint. I arrived at my desk, unlocked my computer, and checked the system metrics. Titan was running flawlessly, processing morning delivery manifests for thousands of retail clients. At 9:10 in the morning, my desk phone chimed. The caller identification displayed Julian Prescott. Julian's voice came through the speaker, smooth and deceptively cheerful. He asked me to step into his executive corner office immediately. I replied that I would be right there. Julian then added a curious instruction, requesting that I bring my encrypted laptop and corporate access badge with me. A cold knot formed in my stomach. There was only one reason an aggressive executive asked an engineer to bring their access security badge to a morning meeting. My hand reflexively touched the envelope in my jacket pocket. If Julian was attempting what I suspected, the entire dynamic of the morning was about to change. I walked down the quiet hallway toward the corner office. The heavy blinds were drawn tight, blocking the view from the open floor. I knocked once and stepped inside. Julian sat behind a massive dark mahogany desk, his hair slicked back perfectly. Sitting in one of the leather guest chairs was Diane Foster, the corporate human resources director. Diane looked deeply uncomfortable, staring down at a thick manila folder in her lap without making eye contact. Julian smiled, though his pale blue eyes remained cold and calculating. He motioned for me to sit down, placing my laptop on the edge of the polished mahogany surface. Julian leaned forward, interlacing his fingers, and announced that Vanguard Logistics was undergoing a strategic, operational restructuring to optimize quarterly expenditures. Julian declared that management had made the decision to eliminate my position effective immediately, pivoting our entire routing logistics to an off-the-shelf third-party cloud vendor. He paused, waiting for me to display shock, panic, or desperation. I remained completely still. Julian then pushed a thick staple-bound contract across the desk toward me. He stated that because of my 9 years of service, the firm was offering an exceptionally generous severance package consisting of 8 months of base salary continuation, plus an immediate lump sum payment of $65,000 upon execution of the agreement today. However, Julian's tone hardened as he added that this offer was strictly contingent upon my immediate signature. If I walked out of the room without signing, the package would be permanently revoked, reverting to the standard 2-week severance. My hand hovered over my jacket pocket where my resignation letter rested. If I pulled out my letter and quit right now, I would get $0 in severance. If I let him fire me under this agreement, I would walk away with nearly a full year of salary. I looked Julian dead in the eye and picked up the contract. I picked up the pen sitting on the mahogany desk and began examining the document Julian Prescott had thrust before me. The contract was titled Voluntary Separation Agreement and General Release of Claims. As my eyes scanned the densely packed paragraphs, I immediately noticed severe formatting inconsistencies. The font style shifted abruptly between paragraphs, the page margins were improperly aligned, and several subheadings used outdated corporate terminology. It bore none of the polished hallmarks of our corporate legal department down in legal counsel's office. Julian tapped his gold wristwatch impatiently, reminding me that he had an important executive meeting in 10 minutes and needed the executed document processed immediately. I remained calm, carefully reading every line of text, while Julian fidgeted in his leather chair. My eyes landed on paragraph 14, labeled Proprietary Intellectual Property and Work Product Rights. In standard technology employment contracts, companies utilize comprehensive work-made-for-hire clauses under federal statutes to claim absolute ownership over every line of code, technical architecture, or concept developed by an employee. However, the clause in this agreement was remarkably archaic. It defined company-owned intellectual property strictly as physical mechanical inventions, printed blueprints, and tangible hard copy schematics. It explicitly stated that unlisted software concepts, source code algorithms, and non-tangible digital architectures remain the sole personal property of the employee, unless explicitly scheduled and assigned under an attached Schedule A inventory. I flipped to the back of the contract. There was no Schedule A attached anywhere. Furthermore, Clause 14b contained a sweeping clean break release. It stated that to ensure a total and final separation of all claims, Vanguard Logistics hereby released any and all corporate rights, claims, or interests in unlisted intellectual concepts created during employment, accepting this mutual release in full consideration for the execution of the severance payout. I looked down at the footer of page 3. The copyright date printed in tiny font read the year 2004. Julian had clearly gone into an old shared corporate drive, pulled up a 20-year-old boilerplate severance template meant for factory shift supervisors from 2 decades ago, and slapped my name on it without sending it to legal review. He was so consumed by his desire to cut headcount and claim quarterly cost savings that he had failed to inspect the legal mechanics of the document. Julian barked that time was up and demanded to know whether I was going to accept the $65,000 lump sum or walk away with 2 weeks' pay. I concealed my internal astonishment, uncapped the pen, and signed my full legal name, Gerald Montgomery, across the signature line. Julian snatched the document from the desk without reading a single page and shoved it into Diane Foster's hands, commanding her to process the electronic wire transfer before the close of business today. Diane gathered the file and quickly left the room. Julian stood up, buttoned his designer jacket, and held out his hand for my security badge and laptop. I handed over my encrypted laptop and unclipped my access lanyard. Julian gave a dismissive wave over his shoulder, telling me that security would escort me out of the building. 2 minutes later, I was walking down the central hallway flanked by 2 corporate security officers. One was Greg, a friendly senior guard I had known for years. Greg looked deeply embarrassed, apologizing softly for having to walk me to the exit doors. I smiled warmly at Greg, assuring him that he was simply performing his assigned duties. I walked with my head held high, passing cubicles where former colleagues stared in disbelief. We reached the glass lobby doors, and the warm afternoon air hit my face. Greg bade me farewell at the curb, and I walked to my parked sedan. I opened the driver door, sat inside the quiet cabin, and pulled my original resignation letter from my jacket pocket. I stared at the paper, and then a deep, uncontrollable laughter welled up from my chest. Julian Prescott had literally paid me $65,000 in cash, plus 8 months of salary to leave a position I was 5 minutes away from resigning for free. I started the engine, pulled out of the garage, and immediately placed a call over my car's hands-free system to my longtime college friend, Lyle Preston. Lyle was a senior managing partner at Preston & Partners, one of the most formidable corporate litigation firms in the state. I explained the exact circumstances of my termination and the peculiar wording of the severance agreement. Lyle ordered me to drive straight to his office downtown without delay. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Lyle's glass-walled office on the 32nd floor, overlooking the city's skyline. Lyle sat across from me, his sharp eyes scanning the 4 pages of my separation contract with meticulous legal scrutiny. Suddenly, Lyle let out a loud whistle and leaned back in his leather chair, a wide grin spreading across his face. Lyle explained that under Title 17 United States Code, Section 106, as well as established federal copyright doctrine regarding work made for hire, intellectual property rights for non-tangible software algorithms do not automatically vest with an employer if the contract explicitly waives them and excludes them from schedule inventories. Because Vanguard Logistics never patented or registered the Titan routing engine, relying instead on internal trade secrecy, the Titan source code remained an unlisted software concept. By executing this specific separation contract, Julian Prescott had legally released all corporate claims to Titan and transferred the sole exclusive copyright of the algorithm directly to me. Lyle emphasized that under contract law, an agreement becomes fully executed and binding once legal consideration is satisfied, meaning the moment the severance funds hit my bank account. I sat at my home kitchen table later that afternoon, alongside my wife Evelyn, continuously refreshing my online banking application. At 1:15 in the afternoon, a notification flashed across the screen. Vanguard Logistics had wired the $65,000 lump sum, along with the first installment of my 8-month salary continuation. The funds were cleared and available. The consideration was legally met. The contract was officially executed. Minutes later, my personal home server chimed with an automated alert, indicating that Vanguard's IT department had formally revoked my remote server access credentials. Julian Prescott believed he had locked me out of the company forever. In reality, he had just locked himself inside a burning building and handed me the exclusive rights to the water supply. Thursday morning arrived with a cool autumn breeze rustling the trees outside my back patio. For 9 years, Thursday mornings at Vanguard Logistics had represented the most intense high-stakes period of the operational week. At precisely 9 in the morning, our automated mainframes executed the Thursday batch processing cycle. During this crucial window, the Titan routing engine ingested tens of thousands of real-time freight manifests from 50 regional logistics hubs, calculating optimal highway routes, fuel stops, and delivery schedules for 450 heavy commercial trucks. If the batch failed or experienced delays, 450 drivers would remain stranded at loading docks across 15 states without certified transport manifests, triggering catastrophic financial penalties for missed delivery windows. Instead of staring at glowing server monitors and nursing my third espresso under flickering fluorescent office lights, I was sitting on my quiet back deck, enjoying a freshly brewed cup of coffee while watching birds at the feeder. I looked at my watch. It was 9:05 in the morning. I knew precisely what was transpiring inside the fourth-floor server center at Vanguard headquarters. The automated batch script had just initiated its primary execution loop. It attempted to establish a secure handshake with external logistics data feeds. However, 3 years ago, following an attempted external cybersecurity breach, I had engineered a custom security protocol into Titan. The engine required a manual rolling encryption security key input every Thursday morning at 9 o'clock sharp. Without my personal administrative authorization key, the automated handshake failed. The system retried the connection 3 times in rapid succession. At 9:08 in the morning, Titan triggered a critical dependency error, locked the master database, and brought the entire routing infrastructure to a complete grinding halt. At 9:15, my personal cell phone began vibrating on the patio table. The screen displayed a text message from Devin, a talented junior systems administrator I had mentored over the past 2 years. Devin wrote frantically, asking if I had modified the administrative security protocol for the Thursday batch, because the server was returning a 403 forbidden access error, and Julian Prescott was currently standing over his desk, screaming in a panic. I felt a fleeting pang of sympathy for young Devin, but I refrained from replying. I turned the phone face down on the table. By 10 in the morning, the silent tranquility of my kitchen was shattered by a continuous barrage of incoming calls. My phone vibrated endlessly on the granite countertop. The caller identification displayed Julian Prescott's direct line, followed by calls from Diane Foster in Human Resources, the central reception desk, and several secondary corporate extensions. Julian and his management team were frantically cycling through every line in the building, trying to reach me. Evelyn looked at the vibrating phone with wide, anxious eyes, asking if I ought to answer. I gently explained to Evelyn that Julian had formally terminated my employment, declared my skills redundant, and escorted me from the premises. If I answered their desperate calls and provided free technical intervention, I would validate their disrespectful treatment. I was no longer an employee. I was an independent third-party entity. At 11:15 in the morning, Julian left a series of increasingly unhinged voicemail messages. In his first message, he attempted to maintain a condescending tone, claiming there was a minor system glitch that I had forgotten to reset before my departure. By his third message, his tone shifted to raw aggression, demanding that I log in immediately and threatening to pursue legal prosecution for corporate espionage and intentional sabotage if I failed to comply. In his final voicemail at 11:45, just 15 minutes before the critical shipping deadline, Julian's voice cracked with utter panic. He admitted that 450 freight trucks were completely paralyzed at loading bays, incurring $75,000 per hour in late delivery penalties, and begged me to provide the administrative access code, promising that management would discuss a consulting fee later. I exported all 7 voicemail recordings and transmitted them directly to my attorney, Lyle Preston. Lyle reviewed the audio files and immediately drafted a formal legal notice under Title 17 United States Code, Section 106. At 1:45 that afternoon, Lyle dispatched an urgent cease and desist notification via encrypted electronic mail to Julian Prescott, Corporate Human Resources Director Diane Foster, and Vanguard's General Counsel. The legal notice explicitly informed leadership that the Titan routing engine was the sole exclusive intellectual property of Gerald Montgomery pursuant to the fully executed voluntary separation agreement. It warned Vanguard Logistics that any attempt to bypass system security, reverse engineer source code, or utilize Titan without an authorized commercial license constituted intentional federal copyright infringement and a severe breach of fiduciary duty. 4 minutes after the email was delivered, my phone rang with an incoming call from Rebecca Vance, Vanguard's formidable general counsel. Rebecca placed the call on speaker with a thoroughly shaken Julian Prescott listening on the line. Rebecca adopted a stern corporate tone, stating that while the company disputed our legal interpretation of the severance contract, Vanguard faced an immediate operational crisis. She offered to retain my services under a temporary consulting arrangement at an hourly rate of $350 for a maximum of 20 hours to unlock the server and transfer administrative credentials to Julian. Julian interjected aggressively, accusing me of holding the enterprise hostage over a simple clerical mistake. I listened to their proposal in complete silence before responding with absolute calm. I informed Rebecca and Julian that their offer of $350 an hour was flatly rejected. I stated firmly that I was no longer a salaried staff member subject to corporate coercion. I was the sole owner of a vital proprietary software asset. I informed them that if Vanguard Logistics wished to restore its shipping operations, General Counsel and senior executive leadership would need to meet with me and my legal counsel in the executive boardroom tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp to negotiate a formal commercial software licensing agreement. Until a contract was signed, every freight truck in their fleet would remain parked. Friday morning arrived under a heavy gray sky. At 8:30 in the morning, Lyle Preston picked me up at my residence in his executive town car. As we drove toward Vanguard Logistics headquarters, Lyle informed me that our legal strategy had achieved maximum leverage. When Lyle dispatched the formal cease and desist notice yesterday afternoon, he had strategically carbon-copied the corporate secretary of the board of directors. Vanguard Logistics was governed by a conservative board composed of wealthy institutional investors. The chairman of the board was Garrison Thorne, a 71-year-old self-made logistics magnate who had founded the parent transport firm 30 years ago. Garrison Thorne was renowned throughout the industry for his uncompromising business ethics, zero-tolerance policy for executive incompetence, and fierce protection of corporate assets. When we pulled into the facility parking lot at 8:45, the operational paralysis was stark and absolute. The sprawling loading docks were eerily quiet. 450 heavy commercial freight trucks sat parked in long, motionless rows across the yard, their massive diesel engines shut down. Dozens of veteran truck drivers, led by a senior fleet driver named Big Hank, stood gathered near the perimeter fence, drinking coffee from thermos cups and arguing heatedly about lost hauling wages. As I stepped out of Lyle's car, Big Hank spotted me and called out across the yard, asking if I was here to fix the computer breakdown so they could get back on the highway. I gave Big Hank a reassuring wave, replying that we were working on a resolution right now. We walked into the corporate lobby, where the atmosphere had shifted dramatically from 2 days ago. Greg, the senior security officer, who had previously been ordered to escort me out of the building, immediately rushed forward to open the glass doors. Greg greeted me respectfully as Mr. Montgomery, informing us that the chairman of the board and the executive committee were waiting for us in the executive boardroom on the 5th floor. We took the elevator directly to the top floor, an exclusive suite reserved for board governance. General Counsel Rebecca Vance was waiting outside the double mahogany doors. Her face was pale, and dark circles under her eyes indicated she had not slept a single hour. She quietly opened the doors and ushered us inside. The executive boardroom was freezing cold, the air conditioning humming softly against a wall of thick tension. Sitting at the head of the massive polished mahogany conference table was Chairman Garrison Thorne. Garrison possessed silver hair, sharp steel-gray eyes, and an aura of absolute authority. Spread out across the table in front of him were my complete personnel file, system audit logs, and the separation contract signed by Julian Prescott. Sitting to Garrison's right was Julian. The arrogant vice president of operations looked entirely destroyed. His expensive Italian suit was rumpled, his silk tie was loosened, and his eyes were bloodshot with panic. He stared fixedly down at the mahogany surface, refusing to make eye contact with anyone in the room. Chairman Garrison Thorne motioned for Lyle and me to take seats at the opposite end of the table. Garrison closed my personnel file with a heavy thud, turned his piercing gaze toward Julian, and demanded a complete explanation for how an executive VP managed to ground an entire nationwide transport fleet and create a multi-million-dollar legal catastrophe. Julian stammered incoherently, attempting to shift blame to human resources and claiming the severance contract was a minor clerical mistake downloaded from an internal drive. Rebecca Vance immediately cut him off, informing the chairman that Julian had rushed the contract execution within 10 minutes to meet a quarterly cost reduction deadline, deliberately bypassing mandatory legal review. Garrison turned his attention toward me, observing that I had created an extraordinary amount of operational trouble for his firm. I met Garrison's gaze with calm composure, explaining that I had not initiated this conflict. I stated that I had been prepared to submit my voluntary resignation on Wednesday morning, but Julian had preemptively terminated my employment, drafted a binding separation agreement, and forced its immediate execution to pad his quarterly performance bonus. I simply accepted the legal terms offered by management. Garrison listened intently, and then a faint, grim smile touched the corner of his mouth, as he acknowledged that I had thoroughly outmaneuvered his executive vice president in a fair legal contest. Garrison asked Lyle to state our precise terms for unlocking the routing system. Lyle opened his leather briefcase and slid a single-page commercial licensing proposal across the mahogany table. Lyle explained that, because Gerald Montgomery owned exclusive federal copyright to the Titan routing engine under Title 17 United States Code, Section 106, Vanguard Logistics must enter into a formal software lease. The terms required Vanguard to pay Gerald a monthly licensing retainer of $18,000 for a minimum term of 2 years, alongside an immediate upfront consulting fee of $85,000 to restore server access today and oversee technical staff training over the next 90 days. Julian leaped out of his chair, shouting that the proposal was outright extortion and asserting that the firm could not pay $18,000 a month for software it had originally funded. Lyle responded with ice-cold precision, reminding the board that Vanguard had paid for labor, but Julian's executed agreement had legally surrendered the resulting product. Lyle added that if Vanguard rejected the licensing terms, Gerald was fully prepared to market the Titan routing engine to major national competitors like FedEx or UPS. The boardroom fell into absolute silence. The threat of transferring our proprietary optimization algorithms to direct commercial rivals was an insurmountable kill shot. Garrison ordered Julian to sit down and shut his mouth. Garrison calculated that attempting to build a replacement routing engine from scratch would require 8 months and over $5 million in capital development, while freight operations remain crippled. Garrison picked up a gold fountain pen and signed the commercial licensing contract without further hesitation. Chairman Garrison Thorne signed his full legal name at the bottom of the commercial licensing agreement, capped his fountain pen, and slid the executed document back across the mahogany conference table to my attorney, Lyle Preston. Garrison turned his head slowly toward Julian Prescott. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of my encrypted laptop as I established a secure wireless connection to Vanguard's primary mainframe server. Garrison's voice was dangerously quiet as he addressed the Vice President of Operations. Garrison stated that Julian had cost the enterprise over $600,000 in delayed freight shipments, exposed the firm to catastrophic legal liabilities, and demonstrated a level of executive incompetence that was utterly unforgivable. Julian attempted to plead for leniency, stammering that his intentions were strictly focused on cutting operational overhead. Garrison cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand, declaring that Julian had attempted to save pennies while burning millions of dollars in corporate assets. Garrison noted that Julian had treated a vital systems architect like disposable trash, and as a direct consequence of his arrogance, he had destroyed his own executive career. Garrison turned to General Counsel Rebecca Vance and instructed her to draft an immediate notice of executive termination for Julian Prescott pursuant to subsection 4 of his employment contract, citing gross negligence resulting in severe operational disruption. His termination was effective immediately, forfeiting all executive bonuses and severance eligibility. Julian stood paralyzed in shock as his corporate authority evaporated in seconds. Security Officer Greg stepped into the boardroom, standing firm beside the door. Greg looked at Julian and calmly requested that he gather his personal items and follow him down to the exit. I watched in quiet satisfaction as Julian Prescott walked out of the executive suite with his head bowed, flanked by the exact same security guard who had escorted me out of the building 48 hours earlier. The poetic symmetry of the moment was absolute. The arrogant young executive who had tried to discard a veteran engineer to pad his quarterly report was now being marched out of the corporate headquarters in total disgrace. I focused my attention on my laptop screen, accessed the Titan Core administrative terminal, and entered the master override security key. Within 10 seconds, the encrypted database unlocked, the automated handshake protocol re-established connection with regional data hubs, and the Thursday batch processing cycle completed flawlessly. I announced to the boardroom that the Titan engine was fully operational and that all 450 freight trucks would receive their certified transport manifests within 10 minutes. Garrison Thorne nodded approvingly, stood up from his chair, and extended his hand across the table, remarking with a dry chuckle that I was welcome back to Vanguard Logistics, not as a vulnerable employee but as an indispensable commercial partner. Over the next 2 hours, Lyle Preston and Rebecca Vance finalized the formal corporate contracts. The resulting legal settlement delivered complete financial independence for my family. First, I retained the full $65,000 cash lump sum and 8 months of salary continuation from Julian's original severance mistake. Second, Vanguard Logistics paid the upfront $85,000 consulting fee directly into my corporate account to cover 90 days of technical oversight. Third, Vanguard executed the binding 2-year software licensing agreement, guaranteeing an $18,000 monthly retainer paid on the first day of every month. I walked out of the corporate building at noon to the thundering roar of diesel engines as 450 freight trucks rolled out of the yard to resume nationwide deliveries. 3 months have passed since that decisive Friday morning in the executive boardroom. Autumn has given way to crisp, early winter air. I am sitting in the comfortable home office of my residence, sipping hot coffee while looking out over our snowy backyard. My consulting arrangement with Vanguard Logistics requires only 3 days of remote oversight per week. Once a month, I visit the corporate facility to mentor Devin, who has been promoted to senior infrastructure manager with a fully staffed engineering team. The drivers, led by Big Hank, treat me with immense respect whenever I walk through the logistics bay. The financial security derived from this victory has transformed our lives. Evelyn and I fully paid off the remaining mortgage on our family home, cleared all outstanding personal debts, and established a robust college investment fund for Chloe that completely covers her upcoming graduate school tuition. Meanwhile, industry colleagues informed me that Julian Prescott has been unable to secure another corporate executive role anywhere in the regional logistics sector. Word travels fast in corporate circles when an executive's negligence costs a firm hundreds of thousands of dollars in a single afternoon. Looking back on this journey, the core lesson I wish to share with every dedicated professional is the fundamental importance of knowing your true worth and recognizing that corporate loyalty is rarely reciprocal. Too many skilled engineers and legacy employees confuse their personal dedication with a corporation's gratitude. To an aggressive corporate executive looking at a spreadsheet, you are often viewed merely as an expensive line item to be trimmed. You must protect yourself by mastering the technical details of your craft, understanding the legal mechanics of every contract you sign, and maintaining a personal financial safety net that gives you the absolute power to walk away. When you hold exclusive control over your skills and refuse to be intimidated by authority, you possess all the leverage necessary to turn an executive trap into your ultimate professional triumph.